Hi, welcome back. Today we will be discussing Chapter 5 of Jansen's book, working on Mezzo-level policy advocacy. So let's get started. Mezzo-level policy advocacy is where you work within organizations or communities to either create policy, change policy, or ensure that policy is being enforced. It's going to follow a lot of the same patterns that we've already discussed in micro-level policy, except this time we're working with bigger organizations. In this case, we're also going to find that we work with a different set of skills. They're similar, but they're not quite the same as some of the things that we saw in micro-level skills. So the first skill that you're going to need is the ability to initiate things. This is simply your own sense of something's wrong and I'm a guy like me, so I'm going to go and do something about it, instead of waiting for someone else to go and make sure that something happens. That's essentially what initiating is that you're willing to step up to the plate. You're willing to take on things yourself, to take initiative, as it were. Second is the ability to influence people. Influence can be done through a couple of different ways. The three primary tools of influence include pathos, which is the use of emotion, logos, which is the use of logic, and ethos, which is the use of a sense of authority or an appeal to authority. So those are three things that you can use. So an example of pathos would be, somebody think of the children! Because we all think of children, we're like, oh yes, help the children, that's wonderful. Um, so yeah, we all get on board. Who's going to say something against helping children? Logos would be, look, if we do this instead of this, we can save this amount of money and help this many people. It's a logical, stepwise kind of way to look at things. An appeal to authority might be something like, well, Jesus said that we have to help our neighbors and love our neighbors, and therefore it would be remiss of us to do something different, to show such apathy towards a client, someone who's paying for our services. Something like that, appealing to an authority or having a sense of authority of what you were talking about. That all of those three things have a great ability to influence people. Three is being able to negotiate and bargain. Now, these are skills in of themselves. These skills require that you do your homework, that you understand what it is that you want, what it is that you hope for, what's your best case scenario, and what is your worst case scenario. At what point are you willing to walk away from negotiations and bargaining, which is sometimes a fair thing to do. If you reach an impasse where someone wants more than the other can give, then it's okay to walk away and just say, hey, look, this isn't going to work out. Go try to find your solution somewhere else. There's some great videos on negotiating and bargaining. Um, I'll post a couple of them. They are, as I said, I mean, there's so many out there though, and it's a very important skill. So if you don't feel like you're up to it, if you're not competent in negotiations, then be sure to watch some of those videos. Mediating conflicts. This is where you look at, well, what kind of conflicts are going on? Can you help be the intermediary between them to help make sure that communication happens and that people are able to find agreeable solutions? Uh, there's a lot of opportunities for mediating conflict in policy work. And then finally, communicating. You have to have excellent communication skills. You've got to understand all of the different things that go into communication, everything from how it is that you encode information in your head, to the way that you translate it to your tongue, the way that you speak it, what details come out when you speak, what environmental issues could influence the way that people hear you, what kind of noise might be going on inside of someone's head that would prevent them from hearing and understanding what you're saying. All of those things are things you need to keep in mind, as well as the different styles of communication, whether it be passive aggressive, assertive, or compromising. Uh, those all have to do with the amount of respect you have for yourself and the amount of respect that you have for others. When you have high levels of respect for yourself and others, you're at assertive. When you are just respectful of yourself, that's aggressive. When you're respectful of others and not yourself, that's passive. When you have respect for no one, including yourself, that's passive aggressive. And when you're somewhere in between, that's compromising. Anyways, lots and lots of stuff out there on these kinds of skills. Be sure to look them up if you don't feel like you're competent in them. These are important social work skills, and you'll use them regularly out there in the field. All right, preliminary challenges. Reading the context of agencies and communities. So in order to really get the context of an agency, a couple of things you might want to look at. What is the mission statement of the agency? Is the mission statement broad? Is it readable? Does it make sense? Is it full of jargon? All of those things are going to tell you different things about the agency you might be working with. What do their budgets look like? Where does their money come from? What is their organizational culture? Their hierarchies, their key players? What are some of the policies in which they work? With whom do they collaborate? With whom do they compete? And what are their values and preferences? What are some of the things that they like and don't like? Those are all things to look at within agencies. In communities, there's no mission statement, and so it's worth noting that that may be a whole different ballgame. So instead, you're going to have to look at different things like demographics, what kind of community it is, what kind of social problems they may have, where are the services distributed, what's the level of civic engagement, all of these things as they're listed here in our slides. Involvement of community leaders and advocacy groups, media presence, all of those things are worth looking into because those are all factors that will help influence a community. Moving on to challenge 1, deciding whether or not you actually proceed with Mezzo level policy. So first of all, you have to decide whether an issue or problem within an organization or community merits the development of an advocacy intervention. Is it going to be worth your time? One of the things to consider is that moving an individual and helping an individual change is sometimes a pretty hefty task in of itself. And yet to do that with an organization or community, that can take even longer. So you've got to make sure that, like, is the problem really big enough that it's going to be worth it? So really, you're going to start with looking at where are the core problems? Are the core problems that the agency or the community are facing serious enough to warrant your attention? That's pretty much the same thing. Okay, so focus on strategy, deciding where to focus. Seeking to change an organization's mission, culture, multidisciplinary training, service provision, policies, funding sources, etc., etc. All of those things can be areas in which you might want to change, and they're all going to have differing levels of difficulty. Changing a mission statement is often a huge deal. That typically requires not only the approval of all of the executives at the top of the organization, but even the board that governs the executives above them. So all things to really keep in mind. Decide to make incremental or larger policy shifts. So that can be, there can be sometimes tiny little changes you can undergo, and sometimes you can make large sweeping changes. But the idea is that you be strategic and understand what your assets and liabilities are. Again, what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses that could impede your project? In communities, make sure that you know what institutions out there can develop policy and where you can make changes in those policy. So there might be a community organization, there might be a homeowners association, There are community groups. There are city councils, county councils, uh, top government. I mean, there's all kinds of places where you could look to try to influence people. One of the things that people are often afraid of is talking to policymakers. You'd be surprised at how personable many of them actually are and how willing they are to actually listen to what you have to say. All right, challenge 3 is get their attention. So make them recognize that there are problems within your community or organization. Um, have them discuss solutions that they can offer if there's anything that people in the upper ranks of organizations like to do, or politicians, is they like to solve problems actually. So make sure that they are able to recognize that there is a problem and let them talk about some of the ways that they think it can be fixed. Um, Obviously, speak to their interests. In terms of an organization's interest is always going to be the bottom line. Doesn't matter how much they love helping people, the bottom line matters. So if it's going to be something that is going to improve their ability to raise money, get money, or save money, they will be interested. So be sure to talk to them in those terms. In terms of politicians, one of the things that they really love is, of course, press, good press especially, the kind of thing that will help them get reelected. Those are the kinds of things that you would want to help push with them, to help them recognize it and get them on board. I think I've covered that. One of the things to consider when working in communities, though, is, well, even with politicians, is look at what organizations are already out there that might be working on this very problem. If you're interested in working with the mentally ill, look at the group NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, an excellent advocacy community that could really help you out with the project that you're working on if that's where you want to go. I've posted some lists of other agencies you might look at depending on what your area of interest is. All right, look at why the problem exists. Typically, this means looking into the history of either the agency or the community. Check out and see what led them to where they are, what events, what people mattered, where did these policies come from that they're currently dealing with. What are the key players and the key factors that led them to the point that they're at now? Okay, develop a strategy or proposal to address the problem. So outline a series of actions, set a timetable, look for opportunities, and very important here, plan for opposition. There will always be opposition. These things don't exist in a vacuum, and typically an idea that's so good that no one would oppose it are so rare that I've yet to see one. So be aware that opposition may come, and be aware of how it is that you're going to try to bring people who would oppose you to the table and negotiate with them, or find ways to placate them, or if necessary to out and out destroy them. Not physically, of course, but sometimes people who oppose you need to be put in their place. And social workers aren't above that. Sometimes that's a necessary strategy if the social justice of a clientele you're facing is threatened. Sometimes that has to happen. Disseminate information quickly. Use technology. There's all kinds of technology out there for that. Develop support for the strategy or proposal. Make sure that you've got your stakeholders in both areas involved. There are all kinds of stakeholders. It could be the directors, the vendors who were involved, police, business people, religious leaders. All of them would be considered stakeholders in an organization or in a community. And it's worth getting their attention as you move forward. Challenge 7, implement it, make sure it happens. The Mezzo policy change is virtually useless without successful implementation.